With movie theaters being what they are these days, I've decided to go back into my video collection and check out a few more recent classics. One of my favorite films from the last few years is 2017's Blade Runner 2049. Even before, all this, movie theaters were having a tough time. A lot of modern lineups really focused on reboots, remakes, comic book films, and if you were lucky, you might get something else in there. That's been the current slate of films for quite some time now. And not to say those movies are all bad, but it pays to have diversity in there as well somewhere. That said, I'd be remiss in not mentioning that Blade Runner 2049 is a sequel. But it's kind of the sequel in the sense of like Tron to Tron Legacy or Return of the Jedi to Force Awakens. There's a long stretch of time in between these films, from 1982 to 2017. And just to put it out there, I like the original Blade Runner. I will admit that while I liked it, it wasn't exactly my favorite sci-fi film of the time. However, over repeated viewings over the years, I've grown to appreciate more and more and more. There's so many different versions of the original Blade Runner, it's really hard to say which is the definitive version. Some people love the theatrical version, some people love the multiple director's cuts, other people love what's considered the final cut from Ridley Scott. It all depends on your point of view. It all depends on what you take as gospel for the characters and whatnot. One of the biggest being, is Deckard a replicant or not? Is that mentioned here? Absolutely. Do they clarify it? That's up to interpretation. And that's one of the great things about Blade Runner 2049. There are a lot of things that are left up for interpretation. Because it's an older film, I tend to get more into spoilers right off the bat, but I'll try to keep it simple. The film starts with Agent K, who's played by Ryan Gosling. Unlike the ambiguity of whether Deckard is a replicant or not, they make it very clear from the beginning that K is a replicant. And because of that status, and also being a Blade Runner himself, he's not liked by a lot of people in this film. The police hate him because they refer to him as a skin job. Obviously, he's not a real human, so he doesn't matter. He's a lower social class and caste. Other replicants hate him because he's there to retire them. After completing what is supposed to be a routine retirement, he finds a skeleton buried under a tree. This leads to another question, and again, spoilers, they don't waste time in saying that this is the skeleton of Rachel from the first film, and she was with child. Part of the fun of Blade Runner 2049 is just the ambiguity. They don't overplay it, but they constantly have you guessing about certain characters and certain motivations. The biggest question being, what is real? What is considered real? And I think that's played out through so many different characters as well. There's the replicant enforcer named Love, who on the surface looks like a vicious killing machine, and yet every time a replicant is killed, she's visibly drawn to tears. And there seems to be an attraction towards Kay that he never reciprocates, much to her frustration. Deckard, played by Harrison Ford, doesn't appear in the film until the last hour of the film. Harrison Ford's performance is great. He's done 2 recent performances during that time period. I really liked him as Han Solo in The Force Awakens, and he's really good here as well. How they address if Deckard is a replicant or not, they do keep it ambiguous. Throwaway comments that you can interpret the way you want to. Ridley Scott feels that Deckard's a replicant. Harrison Ford and many other production members of the original Blade Runner, they don't feel that he is. I personally don't feel that Deckard is a replicant for a number of reasons. One of the biggest is that he ages. He also doesn't have the limitations of a 4-year lifespan, because they make it very clear in the first film that I would like more life. No. And that was that. Roy Batty had to contend with that at the end of the original Blade Runner. During the investigation, as Kay looks for the identity of this missing child, he comes to believe that he might actually be this special child emerging between human and replicant, or replicant and replicant, depending on what you believe. This is all new territory for replicants who are never designed to reproduce. While he's known as a calm and steady character throughout the film, these revelations, as well as just the want to be something more than what he is, pushes him to make more irrational acts, more spontaneous acts. He is a good guy in this film, but he also doesn't really have a stake in the overall events. He wants to believe that he is this special child. When he finds out that he isn't, and there's really no more stakes for him left in this film, he decides to be more than what he was designed to be. For me, one of the most interesting characters is the hologram, Joy. Joy is a hologram girlfriend, whatever you want to call her, for Kay. As lower class as replicants are, holograms are considered even nonetheless. They're less complex, they're not seen as a real girlfriend, they're seen as more of a distraction or a fun fantasy and little else. Yet Joy in this film seems to transcend her programming. There seems to be a legitimate amount of caring for Kay. A lot of people can argue that may just be her programming. She is designed to be whatever you want to see, whatever you want to hear. They make that very clear in the promotional advertisements that you see throughout the city. And yet, there are moments where she doesn't have to act, she doesn't have to pretend, she doesn't have to follow programming. There seems to be greater stakes involved for her as well, whereas Kay is wanting to be more than what he is. Joy seems to want that for herself as well. Kay crashes his car and she gets out of the car and is very visibly distraught that he's injured. There's a moment where she gets a replicant prostitute and does this strange, weird, wonderful merging with this character, whereas Joy can't be physical, the replicant can be, and they kind of merge into this one character. You normally don't think of the word threesome as like, oh, wholesome, but there's something like touching about how they do this, and it's a really, really neat visual effect for how they present that. But the fact that Joy goes out to get this real physical body so that she and Kay can be intimate is an interesting choice. At one point she wants her home unit broken because they could access her memories and find out where he is and what he's been doing. But at that point, that puts a very finite limit on her life. If something happens to her at this point, she will die as far as she can and never come back. And she accepts that choice so she can be a little bit more real, so her life has a little bit more of a stake to it. They do come back to another Joy hologram through the city. It's very interesting. That's another thing about this film. They focus a lot on the eyes, and this Joy in the ad has these solid black emotionless eyes. She has like pink skin and blue hair, and she's meant like almost like a Las Vegas billboard. The whole theme of this movie seems to be choice. The choice of being more than what you're supposed to, going beyond the sum of your limitations to become something greater, something more. To me, that's what keeps the plot so interesting from beginning to end. And for a long film that's really interesting, you don't really see it in a slow, philosophical, less action-packed film. There's action in this film, but for those who are familiar with the original Blade Runner, it was a slow film. It was a very, I'm taking my time to get to the destination here, enjoy the scenery along the way. This film is a very slow pacing. I would think in light of every other film that's come out for the last few years, this is such a unique take, and I think that's one of the reasons why I found it so refreshing when I saw it. That's nothing to say of the visuals. This film is so above and beyond in terms of its visuals and what it does. Every scene is interesting. I can't think of one shot off the top of my head that wasn't like, wow. It was just visually arresting, and I really could not take my eyes off any of it. It's everything from the decay of the city, because obviously the city is worse off than it was in the original Blade Runner film. There's the opening farm where instead of getting this beautiful pseudo-neon cityscape, you have this desolate looking farm where a replicant is just kind of eking out a meager existence making protein. Everything, every angle, every shot. I think it's one of the most visually arresting films I've seen in a very, very long time. I probably would not see another visual film that really was like, wow, and I just kind of watched the whole thing. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse was another one of those films that just kept my attention all the way through just because of its unique visual look. But Blade Runner 2049 is one of the prettiest films that I've seen in years. And that's coupled with an excellent soundtrack, great sound effects. They know how to use sound so well in this film. Much like the Joy advertisement, it's everything you want to see and everything you want to hear. For that reason, it was captivating to me. I know a lot of people said, it could be cut by 20-30 minutes, and maybe that's true, but you know, I liked the story, I liked the ambiguity, I liked finding the answers out along with the characters, and I just simply liked taking my time and enjoying this world. Everything felt organic, including the soundtrack, including the visuals. It all flowed so well. And it's a shame that Blade Runner 2049 did not do well at the box office. You know, money doesn't mean everything. There are some films out there that have made billions upon billions of dollars and they're absolute crap. There are some films, including the original Blade Runner, which didn't make anything but have since become cult classics in the years after. Blade Runner 2049 celebrates the medium of film and shows what you can achieve and what is possible through this wonderful media. Would I recommend Blade Runner 2049? Absolutely. If you are a film buff, If you loved the first Blade Runner, even if you've never seen the first Blade Runner, it's good for back context, absolutely, but you don't need to see it in order to enjoy this film on its own standing. With a lot of my film reviews of late, I've definitely enjoyed getting into some of the more junky titles that are out there, the quirky stuff, or things that, I wouldn't necessarily say are great, but I have fun kind of picking them apart. I think I'd actually like to use this time to talk about some of the films that are more meaningful to me, some of the ones I find more inspiring, or just, they're just great ways to spend an evening. I think I'm going to actually touch on a couple personal favorites from my next few reviews. I've got a couple in mind. I'm probably going to go all across the board in terms of what I think I would like to talk about and what I think you guys would probably like to hear. I'll make a couple recommendations of just some films. If you've seen them, wonderful, and if you haven't, maybe you'll get some new ideas, because there's definitely plenty of time to sit around these days, isn't there? Anyway, thanks so much for checking it out, and I will see you next time. Take care.